The mare didn't lift her head when they dragged her in. Her eyes were crusted shut. Her ribs looked like someone had carved them from driftwood, covered in flies, stinking of rot and rain rot. She wasn't even worth a bullet to most. But then a man nobody expected stepped forward, not with words, not with money, but with stillness. And what followed wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. The heat sat heavy on the fairground, like an accusation. Dust clung to skin, to denim, to the corners of mouths gone dry from too much sun and too little shade. Kids swatted at flies with paper fans, men leaned against rusted rails, and somewhere a vendor cursed softly as his cooler sputtered out warm soda. They brought her out without ceremony. Lot hash 49, she didn't walk. She shuffled, legs folding slightly with each step like her bones were forgetting how to hold her weight. Her coat, if you could call it that, was a patchwork of scabs and sweat-crusted hair, mottled gray where it should have been sorrel. Her ribs jutted out like broken fence slats. Flies clouded around her eyes, her teats, the raw sores on her flanks. The handler tugged hard on the rope. She didn't even flinch. A woman near the front gagged quietly and turned away. A boy whispered, "Is it dying?" Someone near the back said too loud, "What the hell is that doing in the ring?" The auctioneer cleared his throat like he didn't want the job. Lot 49, he mumbled. 10 years old, mare, no papers. No one moved. The mare blinked, slow and dry, like it hurt to open her eyes. One leg buckled slightly, and she caught herself, barely. Her ears didn't twitch. Even the tail didn't swish. The only thing alive about her was the slow, hollow rise of her ribs as she fought for air. The kind of air that didn't heal, just kept you breathing enough to suffer. Start and bid at 50, the auctioneer tried. A few chuckled, most didn't bother. "She's cooked already," someone muttered. "Wouldn't even pull a plow." They let her stand there too long, long enough for the shame to creep in. Not pity, just discomfort. A reminder of something no one wanted to admit, that once maybe she had been beautiful, strong, fast, but now she was just a carcass waiting for a number to be spray painted on the flank. A future of dog food or glue. The kind of fate folks didn't talk about when they brought their kids to watch the pretty ponies parade. And still, she stood, not proud, not stubborn, just surviving. The auctioneer sighed, "No takers, final call." That's when someone shifted in the back. Boots scuffed. A figure in a worn canvas coat stepped out from behind the bleachers, his face shadowed under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. He didn't raise a card, didn't say a word. He just started walking toward her, and in a crowd full of mouths ready to mock, not one person spoke. He'd been there since before the sun burned the last of the morning haze off the dirt, sat alone 2 rows from the back like he wasn't hiding, but sure as hell wasn't trying to be seen. The kind of man who didn't fit the noise of the auction, didn't glance at the show horses or the polished buyers with cash to burn. He just watched, quiet, still, like stone set in earth long enough to forget it was once moved there. His canvas coat was sun-bleached and fraying at the seams. One sleeve had a tear stitched clumsily with fishing line. His boots looked like they'd walked through 3 wars and maybe started 2 of them. The brim of his hat shaded a face too weathered to guess an age, but not so old it looked weak. His hands stayed clasped, fingers calloused, nails short. The only thing that moved was his eyes, and they hadn't blinked since Lot 49 stumbled in. Most folks didn't even notice him. A few did, then looked away fast. There was something about his stillness that made people uncomfortable, like he saw more than he should, like he already knew how the day would end. When the mare collapsed halfway to her knees and caught herself with a breath so loud it cut the air, that's when he moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just up. Like the ground let him go because it knew something was about to change. He didn't push through the crowd, didn't ask permission. He walked along the edge of the stands, past vendors half asleep in folding chairs, past kids too tired to care, past the announcer's booth where the mic crackled uselessly. Every step echoed louder than it should have. People started turning. "Who's that?" someone asked. "Is he a vet?" "No, don't recognize him." Maybe he's drunk, but he wasn't swaying. He wasn't stumbling. He was walking straight toward the mare with a purpose that made even the auctioneer forget his next line. The man stopped just outside the ring. The mare lifted her head for the first time, just a fraction, but enough. He climbed the rail slow, one boot after the other, until he dropped into the dirt, like he'd done it 1,000 times. A few gasps, a shout from one of the handlers. The auctioneer started to speak, but the man raised one hand, not high, just enough to quiet the world around him. Then he stepped closer. The mare didn't flinch. He reached out, not to grab, not to pull, just placed his hand flat on her shoulder, gentle, like memory. And in that moment nobody laughed, because everyone could feel it. Whoever he wasn't just here to buy, he was here to remember. The heat held its breath. He stood there, hand resting on her withers, like he'd found something no one else had bothered to look for. Not value, not potential, just a pulse, a whisper of life beneath skin too tight and ribs too proud. The mare didn't move, didn't shy or tremble. Her eye rolled once, slow and glassy, then settled. The auctioneer blinked hard, sweat tracing a line down his temple. "Sir, you can't. There's a procedure." The man didn't answer. Didn't need to. The way he stood, shoulders squared, boots rooted, breath steady, said more than bidding ever could. He wasn't challenging anyone. He wasn't asking. He was claiming. The handler by the gate hesitated, shifted his weight, took half a step forward, and then froze like something in the air told him not to. Someone in the stands muttered, "Is this part of the show?" Another replied, "I don't think so." No one laughed. The auctioneer cleared his throat again. Starting bid's still 50. Anyone? Nothing. The crowd wasn't silent because they didn't care anymore. They were silent because something was happening. Something they couldn't name but felt deep in the bones. Like the moment before a storm. Like the kind of silence that follows the truth. The man reached into his coat. A shuffle. A few hearts skipped. Then he pulled out a folded slip of paper. Crisp, neat. He handed it to the handler with a nod. The handler read it, his brow furrowed, then lifted. "Cashier's check," he said aloud. $500. A ripple moved through the crowd, like a stone dropped into still water. 500. For her. Is he crazy? That thing's not gonna last a week. He's wasting money. But no one stepped forward to outbid him. No one raised a card. The auctioneer looked down, voice catching in his throat. "Sold," he said, softer than usual. "Lot 49. Final sale." The gavel hit wood. The sound cracked through the dust like thunder, and still the man didn't move. He waited until the handler unhooked the rope and stepped away. Then he gave the mare a soft click of the tongue. No tug, no pressure, just presence. And damn if she didn't take one shaky step forward, then another. He walked beside her, slow, unhurried, out of the ring, and through a silence that felt sacred. No applause, no cheers, just the sound of flies retreating as the mare passed, and the crowd parting like they'd witnessed something they didn't have words for. A man who didn't speak, a bid without numbers, and a moment that no one watching would ever forget. The sun had started to slip lower in the sky, turning the dust gold and long, the kind of light that made things look softer than they really were. She didn't walk, not really. Her steps were stumbles stitched together by will, each hoof dragged more than landed, her legs trembling under the weight of her own bones. The rope hung loose in his hand, but it wasn't guiding, it was just there, like a line between the forgotten and the one man who refused to forget. A woman near the gate shook her head. "Poor thing won't see the morning. Should have just let her go." Someone else added, "Ain't mercy keeping that alive. It's selfish." But the man didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't waste breath explaining to people who'd already decided what wasn't worth saving. His canvas coat caught the wind just enough to lift the hem as he walked, slow beside her, matching her pace like she wasn't broken, just tired. And every few steps, he spoke, not loud, not for anyone else, just soft words meant for her ears alone. "Easy now. You're all right. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you no more." She didn't understand the words not yet, but something in the tone made her eyes shift toward him, just for a second, just enough to remember she wasn't alone. They reached the edge of the fairground, where the trucks and trailers waited in the shadow of sagging trees. He didn't have a ramp, didn't even have a proper trailer, just an old flatbed with a makeshift chute and a layer of hay that had seen better days. Some boys nearby laughed. "That thing won't load. She ain't got the legs. She's gonna drop right there." But she didn't, not right away. She stopped at the base, chest heaving, legs locked, and then he knelt, right there in the dirt. not to pull, not to plead, just to be with her at her level. His hand rested on her chest, slow and steady. "It's up to you now," he murmured. A minute passed, then another. She took one step, then another, and climbed. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't fast, but she did it, shaky and sweating, half collapsed, but she did it. The man stood, dusted his knees, and shut the gate behind her, with a quiet finality that sounded more like a promise than a lock. People kept watching, but the murmurs stopped, not out of respect, not yet, out of confusion, because when you see something that isn't supposed to happen, you don't clap, you don't cheer, you just wonder what else you've been wrong about. The shed leaned to one side like it was tired of standing. The tin roof had holes where stars came through at night, and the door creaked like it had stories it hadn't told in years. It wasn't much, but it was dry and quiet. And he backed the flatbed up to the gate and waited. No rope, no rush, just a soft whistle, barely more than a breath. She didn't move at first, then inch by inch she stepped down, hind legs trembling, knees locking, neck low and swaying like a branch too heavy with wind. The descent wasn't pretty, but it wasn't forced, and when her hooves hit dirt, the sound was so soft it didn't seem real. He led her to the shed, the rope slack between them. Inside he'd spread what hay he had in the corner, tucked a bucket of water next to an old feed pan he'd scrubbed clean with his own shirt. No one else had touched the place in years, but he had. The mare stood in the doorway, sides heaving, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion or pain, or maybe both. He didn't push her in, just stepped aside and waited. And after a long minute she walked in on her own. That night he pulled up an old metal chair and sat just outside the doorway, the shed light casting a dull orange glow over the dirt. He didn't speak, just listened to her breath, to the crickets, to the silence he hadn't shared with another living thing in too long. He cleaned her wounds one at a time, slow, careful, hands steady in a way only old hands can be. There were patches of skin rubbed raw, gashes crusted with infection, and legs swollen from neglect. He worked without flinching, whispering things like, "I know, girl, and this part ain't gonna be kind." But his touch never betrayed the words. The mare never laid down, but she didn't try to leave, either. Morning came like it always did, slow, with sun pushing through holes in the roof like fingers parting a curtain. She blinked, just once, but it was clear, focused. She saw him. He dozed off in the chair, hat pulled low, a blanket draped across his knees. When he stirred he didn't startle, just looked up and smiled, small and tired. "Mornin', Mercy," he said, like they'd known each other for years. The name hadn't been said before, not out loud, but the way she didn't turn away said maybe she'd been waiting for one. And out past the shed, beyond the edge of the dry grass and rusted fence line, the wind shifted, just slightly, like the land was paying attention again. It started small. A truck slowed as it passed the edge of his property, windows down, radio low. The driver didn't stop, just lingered for a few extra seconds, long enough to see the mare's silhouette in the doorway of the old shed. Next day another truck did the same, then another. Nobody said anything, but word has a way of traveling without voices, especially in a town where stories stick to porch rails and coffee shop windows like dust after a storm. At the feed store someone asked, "That old coot outside of town, he still got that skeleton of a horse?" "Yeah," came the reply. "Still breathin', far as I know." They shook their heads, laughed a little, but no one told him to stop. By the end of the week, a box of salve showed up on his porch. No note, just a veterinary label, and a price tag already peeled off. He didn't ask who brought it, just used it, gentle, like always, on the mare's shoulders where the flies still clung thickest. Then came the boy, couldn't have been more than 11, rode up on a battered bike with handlebars wrapped in duct tape, left a small bale of hay at the gate, and pedaled off like he'd stolen something. Never said a word. The old man found it that evening, stood over it for a long time, then he carried it to the shed, fed the mare a flake, and left the rest stacked neatly in the corner, like it was sacred. People started noticing things they didn't before. The mare, still thin, still ragged, stood a little straighter now. Her coat, though patchy, had begun to shine in places where the rot was gone. Her eyes didn't drift anymore. They followed the man when he moved. She even started nickering when he came near, a sound so faint it felt more like breath than voice. And every morning, without fail, He sat outside that shed with a tin cup of black coffee and just existed beside her. A neighbor stopped by once, didn't come up the drive, just leaned on the fence. She got a name, he asked. The old man nodded, never turning his head. Mercy. The neighbor tipped his hat, didn't say more, but the next day a fresh bag of oats appeared on the porch, tied shut with baling twine. A whisper had started, not loud, not gossip, something quieter, heavier, like the wind carried it, cautious and slow. Maybe it wasn't a waste after all, maybe it never was, and in a town where most stories ended in silence or sale, the idea that something broken could still be worth saving, well, that kind of idea had a way of sticking. The truck rolled up just after noon, dust trailed behind it like a warning, and the sun glinted off chrome that looked too polished for a road like his. The old man didn't stand. He kept sitting in his chair outside the shed, a hand resting on his knee, eyes calm but sharp. Mercy grazed a few feet away, ribs still visible but moving now, stronger, steadier. The door of the truck creaked open. Boots hit gravel. A man stepped out, tall, broad, tan lines, cut deep into his skin like bark. He wore a ranch brand on his belt buckle, and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's my horse," he said, loud enough to carry. The old man didn't move. "Name's Trevor Lance," the man added. "She was sold by mistake. Hired hand didn't have the right. I've got the paperwork back home, so I'm taking her back now, and we can skip the trouble." He walked a few steps forward, all swagger and shadow. The mare lifted her head. The old man stood, not fast, not slow, just with the kind of weight that makes people think twice. Trevor tilted his head, annoyed. "You got ears right, old man." He pointed toward Mercy. "She's mine, that's a fact." The man didn't argue, didn't protest, just stared at him for a long moment, then said, "No," one word, quiet, flat, final. Trevor blinked. "What?" "She's not yours," the man said. "Not anymore." The rancher chuckled like he'd just been told a joke that wasn't funny. "You think you can keep her? On what grounds?" The old man looked past him for a second, toward the gravel road and the hills beyond. Then he said, "She came here broken. If she was yours, she'd have died that way." Trevor took another step, jaw tightening. "You don't want a problem with me." The man didn't flinch. "I don't want anything from you. But you're not taking her." Mercy moved now, closer to the man, slow and deliberate, standing beside him like she knew the meaning of what was being said. Trevor opened his mouth to speak again, but the sound of tires on gravel cut through the air. Another truck pulled in, then another. The boy with the duct-taped bike stood off to the side watching, and in the silence that followed, a neighbor climbed out and said, "She's not yours, Lance." A second voice, "Saw you run that mare damn near to death 2 years back. We remember." Trevor looked around. The stillness was different now. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and got back in his truck. The engine coughed, gravel flew, and when the dust settled, only one thing was clear. She wasn't just a horse anymore. She was someone worth standing for. It came on a Wednesday. No knock, no stamp, just a plain brown envelope left on the old man's porch, tucked under a rusted horseshoe like it was trying to pass for harmless. The kind of envelope that didn't carry good news, just pressure, dressed in paper. He picked it up without ceremony, brought it inside, laid it on the table beside the half-drunk coffee and the worn leather halter he hadn't used since she arrived. No return address, no signature. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter full of legal threats, a photocopy of a faded bill of sale, and an old picture of Mercy, though they didn't call her that. In the photo she stood in a dry lot, ribs already showing, eyes hollow, a number tag clipped to her mane. No name, just weight and age scribbled in grease pencil on a clipboard someone held out of frame. They called her Unit 12B. The letter was worse. It threw around words like recovery rights, asset reclamation, breach of property sale, threatened court filings and fees that sounded like the beginnings of a slow grind meant to wear a man down until he folded. He didn't fold, didn't even sigh, just slid the photo aside and stared at the last page. His thumb smudged a little of the ink near the bottom. Then he leaned back, reached for his coffee, and said aloud, "You ain't a unit, and you sure as hell ain't 12B." Out in the shed, Mercy shifted, as if she'd heard. He walked out a few minutes later, letter folded once and slipped into his coat pocket, not out of fear, but because some things are worth keeping close when you've seen this game play before. Mercy stood in the doorway, head low, but alert. Her coat, while still rough in patches, had taken on a dull shine. Her wounds had crusted over. The flies didn't swarm like they used to. She watched him now, not just out of instinct, but with a kind of quiet trust that took root over time and didn't shake easy. He ran a hand down her neck. "They want to scare us," he said softly, "make us forget how far we've come." The mare didn't move. "They don't get to do that anymore." He turned, walked back toward the fence line and stood there a while, watching the road like it might carry another kind of storm, but none came, only wind, and the rustle of old cottonwoods. Behind him, the mare stepped further into the light, and the man who once rescued her nameless from the dirt now knew better, because once you name something mercy, you don't back down, you protect it. It happened in the cool stretch of morning, when the sun was still deciding if it wanted to burn or bless the land. Dew clung to the dry grass like it had forgotten where it lived, and a soft hush settled over the field behind the shed. He had opened the gate like he always did. No halter, no lead, no commands, just swung it wide and stepped aside, coffee in hand. As Mercy stepped out, she sniffed the wind, ears forward, legs braced like she wasn't sure if she remembered how to trust the ground beneath her. Her coat caught the early light, and though her ribs still showed, they were no longer a map of pain, just history. The boy was already there, sitting on the top rail of the fence, legs swinging, eyes wide. He came every Saturday now, didn't say much, just watched, brought apples in his backpack, and listened like everything the old man did was scripture. And then without warning, she moved. Not a trot, not a stumble, a run, crooked and slow at first, her back legs unsure of the rhythm, but it was real, and it was hers. Her tail lifted, her ears pinned, her muscles remembered. The ground didn't shake, but the silence did. The old man didn't speak, just lowered his cup and stood there, still as a fence post, eyes locked on the shape of her flying. However bent and jagged it looked, like he was watching a ghost find its way back into skin. Dust kicked up behind her, thin and pale, like memory scattering. She circled once, then again hooves, beating out a sound that didn't echo pride or power, just survival. The boy clapped once, instinctively, then caught himself and stopped. Nobody else was there. But if you asked later, half the town would swear they saw it happen. She slowed gradually, breath loud, body slick with sweat, chest rising like a bellows worked by grace alone. When she stopped, she turned to face him. He nodded once. "That'll do," he whispered. And in her eyes, still tired, still scarred, there was something new. Not fear, not even hope, just a knowing, a remembering of what it felt like to run, because you wanted to, not because you were chased. The boy hopped down and walked toward the old man. "She's fast," he said, voice hushed, like a secret. The man smiled, not wide, just enough. She always was, and in the quiet that followed, Mercy lowered her head and grazed. The sun climbed higher. The wind carried the dust away, and somewhere between the clapping hooves and the silence they left behind, something shifted, not just in the field, in the story itself. The fairground looked the same cracked bleachers, same sun-bleached banners, flapping half-hearted in the wind, same patch of dirt that had swallowed the bones of too many forgotten horses. But something was different. Maybe it was the season, early fall now, with a breeze that smelled more like endings than beginnings. Maybe it was the silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that settles when people know they're about to witness something they won't forget. He led her in slow, no rope, no halter, just Mercy, walking beside him like she chose to. Her coat was still rough in places, her scars still visible, but her head was high, her stride was clean, and she moved like she remembered. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, a gasp near the front. One of the women who'd looked away months ago now leaned forward, hands clasped tight, like she was afraid to blink. They didn't announce her. There was no listing, no lot number, just an old man in a faded coat walking a mare into the ring, not to sell, not to prove, just to show, and that was enough. She paused in the center, ears flicking at the sound of distant hoofbeats and creaking wood. Then, on her own, she stepped in a slow circle, not perfect, not flashy, but deliberate. A few people stood. The boy was there too, hat 2 sizes too big, eyes wide, fingers curled around the top rail of the fence. He didn't cheer, just watched, mouth slightly open, like he was trying to memorize the moment before it passed. The man didn't speak, didn't wave. He just placed a hand on her shoulder and stood beside her, as if to say, "This is who you left for dead." And now, she was alive, not polished, not new, but whole in a way that couldn't be bought or branded. When they turned to leave, the crowd parted without being asked. Nobody laughed, nobody looked away, and in the hush that followed their steps, someone started to clap, slow, hesitant, then joined by another and another, not thunderous, not wild, just honest, respect in its quietest form. By the time they reached the edge of the ring, the boy had climbed down and was waiting. "She looks different," he said softly. The old man nodded. "She is." Then he opened the gate, and Mercy stepped out into the fading sun, dust rising behind her like memory, and for the first time, the ground of that old fair didn't feel like a grave, it felt like a beginning. He never told them why. Not the crowd, not the sheriff, not the boy who showed up every Saturday with apples in his pocket and a question in his eyes. They all asked, in their own quiet ways, "What made you step forward? Why her? What did you see?" But he'd just smile, small and far off, and say something like, "Some things don't need saying." The truth lived in the lines of his face, in the way he moved, deliberate, careful, like a man who knew what it was to break and to heal. But he never shared the full story. Not the part about the war, or the mare he'd lost once before, or the promise he made long ago, kneeling beside a different stall with blood on his boots and silence in his throat. Because some ghosts are meant to be carried, not released. Every morning, just as the light turned gold at the edges, Mercy waited by the fence. No call, no whistle. She was just there, head high, ears forward, breath curling in the chill of dawn. He'd bring his coffee, lean against the post, and they'd watch the field together. Not because there was anything new to see, but because they were new, somehow, changed by time, by pain, by the slow work of trust returned. The boy kept coming. He learned to ride with no reins, learned when to speak and when to be still. And one day, as the old man watched the boy on Mercy's back, circling slow and easy under a sky about to rain, he finally said it. She wasn't just a rescue. The boy blinked. What was she then? The man looked out at the mare, scarred, strong, standing. She was proof. The boy didn't ask of what, he just nodded like he understood anyway. Later folks in town would say Mercy was the turning point, that things changed after her, that people got slower with judgment, quicker with kindness. Not everyone, but enough to notice. And the man, he stayed, didn't chase recognition, didn't cash in the story, just tended the shed, mended fences, and poured coffee like it was communion. Because some people don't save lives for applause, they do it because they remember what it feels like to be left behind. Because once, someone knelt for them when everyone else walked away. And when you've known that kind of saving, you don't forget, you return it. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe for more powerful tales of redemption and resilience. Like the video, if Mercy's journey touched your heart. Share your thoughts or your own rescue story in the comments. We read every one, and don't forget to turn on notifications, so you never miss a story that matters.